In the spirit of spooky month, we have the U.S. Marines witness paranormal, quote unquote, event in Afghanistan, the observation post rock incident by MrBallen. If you have not heard of MrBallen, seen MrBallen, absolute, just super legit dude. Everything I've come across on him, he does really good reads of stories. He brings a lot of cool things to the table, a lot of cool concepts, and he has a way with words, as you'll see. This is the infamous observation rock. I want to say copypasta, as I can't necessarily cite it back to anything material, but if you have military experience, maybe you'll or have experienced anything spooky, or even both, allegedly, if you have both military and spooky experiences, maybe you'll find this right up your alley.
The paranormal does not really have a place in the military, despite what anybody tells you. It's just not something that gets discussed. Now, I was a bit of an anomaly. I was in the Navy for 7 years. 5 of those years were spent on a SEAL team, and maybe because we were in such small teams, people had to put up with my weirdness and my interest in, the strange happenings around the world. But, really that was an anomaly. And I think it comes from the culture inside the military, where you have a group of people that has such a intense job that's so rooted on practical approaches to problem solving. There is no time to be theorizing about how demons and ghosts and things that are out of this world are having an impact, because we need to focus on what's happening right now in front of us. There's no space for anything else. And so
I think I can agree with that take. I mean, as far as any service member, I would argue, once again, civilian here, I can't really necessarily speak definitively on military matters or military personnel. I will acknowledge my shortcomings. I would argue that, yeah, you have to be grounded. If you're given a problem, I want that direction deleted, right? As we joke about the I almost said UNSC. That is Halo. Excuse me, United States Marine Corps, USMC. My apologies. If you need that direction deleted, right? Well, how are you going to do it? You're not necessarily worried about the concept of a djinn. You're not worried about the concept of a Dybbuk box. You're not worried about finding a grimoire. You're not worried about, demons, ghosts, the paranormal, paracausal, what have you, right? You're not necessarily worried about that. You're just going to find the most efficient way of making sure that direction no longer exists. At least as far as the comment section I'm aware of, and some of that could be meme, some of that could be dramatization. I'm not sure. I don't really have a say in this. Military deals with can be solved with bullets, and there are definitely things that can be solved. But, I think that that's a very realistic and reasonable take, and honestly, you can justify a lot of it, whether you're a skeptic, whether you're a believer, across that spectrum, maybe somewhere in the infinity of gray in between, right? I think we can at the very least agree, if your job is to do a specific thing or specific things, you're not necessarily worried about the particulars. You're was elites attacking us at the time, right? Yeah, you're making sure that you're getting your job done, you're being safe doing it.
When you do hear stories coming out of the military that are paranormal in nature, it isn't that you should inherently believe them, but rather you should understand that if they have come to the conclusion that this is paranormal, they have ruled out virtually everything else. And so today I'm going to share a military paranormal story that happened in Afghanistan in 2009 when 8 US Marines were stationed at this very isolated observation post in the middle of Helmand province. And
I'm not sure if anyone here was stationed over there, anyone watching this or anyone in chat. I have no idea where this is in regards to the validity of there being an observation rock in Helmand province in Afghanistan. I'm not entirely sure on the validity of this. Also, in regards to, I'm very curious if you do have Marine expertise, or if you have expertise, or at least just Marine protocol and stuff. If this, as I'll call it, copy pasta, if they did their due diligence, and at the very least, I can say if a Marine tells me something happened, it damn well happened. You ain't gonna hear some argument from me.
Very strange things happened out there that the Marines that were there believe are still plaguing them to this day. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, you've come to the right channel, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, I would encourage you to play Ding Dong Ditch on the like button's house, and then also...
I love that the things he does with the like button is just perfect. It's such a cool way of engaging with the like button and the subscribe button. I absolutely love his style. Very personable, very approachable, very professional, very funny on occasion.
Subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story.
Sounds a little compressed. I think the intro is a lot cleaner in some more recent videos. I see that in chat there is unfortunately I cannot elaborate on certain information. Don't worry about it. I get it. Don't worry about it. It's all fine. I totally, as someone who's been under NDAs, and you definitely aren't under any sort of OPSEC or NDA, who definitely aren't, don't worry about it. You don't have to extrapolate. It's perfectly fine.
In June of 2009, US and NATO forces surged into Afghanistan. Troop numbers escalated dramatically in preparation for this massive offensive against the Taliban. During this surge, a very small team of Marines, 8 Marines, were given a mission to go to an observation post in Helmand province where a group of British soldiers were stationed at the time. An observation post, or OP as it's called in the military, is any location where you're able to observe. Hence the name. Most OPs, if not all OPs, are located on high ground because that provides you the best view. OPs are very strategically valuable. You have the higher ground and you can see what's going on around you. And so
I think, doesn't this serve the dual... So I was talking about this on one of my road trips up to an SCA event with my Cav Scout buddy, and I think we were referring to... God, it's outside of... We were making our trip, I think, over to Twin Falls, and there's a place that I think it's either the Cav Scouts or the Air Force Base uses for drills, and like there's a little rock over there. And, you know, getting the high ground is important. The high ground serves 2 purposes. You know, one, you can, you know, observe everything around you. You do have a higher ground, but it's also a defensible position. Doesn't it also have the unfortunate side effect of the enemy knows exactly where you're at? So if they had some, you know, artillery or some mortars, that could also be a bad thing. I've had a couple conversations about this before, and I'm not entirely sure about the cost benefits of that.
So as a result, OPs become prime targets for attack. Now, the OP that these Marines were going to, OP Rock, was a little bit unique. It was strategically very important, but it didn't really have the higher ground. All around it were other large pieces of terrain, which meant if you poke your head up for too long, you might get shot from a sniper on the mountain.
Yeah,
and so OP
because people know exactly where you're at. You know, oh, there's an observation post on top of that rock, on top of that hill, on that mountain. You know where everybody else can be. But it's also, everyone knows where you are as well. So yeah, I see in chat, yeah, artillery can be an issue with the high ground too. Yeah, okay, yeah. So it does have it's a double-edged sword, as it were. Told me the AA can't, you can't, don't worry. If there's one thing, chat and viewers, that I will absolutely respect, is if you can't talk about something, regardless of reason, you don't want to talk about it, there's allegedly an NDA, there's allegedly OPSEC involved, don't worry about it. Nothing happened. It's all good. There's nothing to talk about. You're all good.
Rock was like a very dangerous and isolated place to be. Yeah. Not to mention laughably small and had almost no amenities. It was basically a couple of HESCO barriers, those big brown squares that get filled with sand and dirt to stop bullets. And then, you know, not even cots. They slept literally on the ground on sleeping pads and a couple of ghillie tents overhead. That was about it. And so these Marines...
Sounds like very minimalistic cover. I feel like the Marines would thrive here.
Were going to be there for 60 days, where they were not going to be able to go anywhere. They were just isolated and stuck on this tiny little wasteland in the middle of Afghanistan. The 8 Marines were led by Sergeant Green, and his second in command was Corporal Lena. The other 6 junior Marines were Zolik, Hoyt, Wilson, Parker, Smith, and Gibbs. After driving their up-armored vehicles all the way through the snaking pass, they get to OP Rock, and the British soldiers are there anxiously waiting for them.
I'm trying to, like, date when this would happen. I think he said when it happened, right? Because I wasn't aware that the British were still... I actually don't even know what the British military does nowadays, actually. Generally, when I hear military news, it's usually about the American military. I don't really hear anything about the British military. If you're part of the British military, hi. Welcome. If you found this video, you absolute legend, welcome. I hope you're doing okay. Early 2009. Okay, yeah. Okay, that makes a little bit more sense then. Trick is to hold the high ground without looking like you hold the high ground. Ah, yes. I love it. The Marines would thrive wherever they go because they're Marines. I can't say oorah, but oorah.
Anytime you turn over with any other unit, you do something called turnover operations, where because you're new to the area, you want to go out and do like a presence patrol or something to get a feel for the area with the people who have been there, to kind of give you a lay of the land.
NATO stuff,
say, hey, look out for this area. We think there's IEDs over there. Remember, if you're over here, you're in plain sight of the enemy. They can shoot you. But when they got there, the British were so anxious to leave. They did not do turnover ops. The British just looked totally weathered and beaten down and ragged, like they'd been fighting at OP Rock for decades. But they'd only been there for 60 days, the same amount of time that these Marines are about to be there. And before they leave, one of the British soldiers turns and says, hey, just so you know, if you dig anything up here, just put it back. And the Marines look at him like, what are you talking about? And he doesn't elaborate. He just says again, if you dig anything up, just put it back. Trust me. So that night, the men have settled into their new home for the next 60 days. And the way it works...
So I guess what is the formality on turnover ops? Because, I mean, it totally makes sense, right? So if there's an exposed section, right, that is relevant, like, what I'm assuming that this is incredibly important, not even just from a paperwork perspective, right? Like, this is an important part of any operations joint op. At least that's assuming from a face level, right? How important is this? And so if, for instance, you encounter a platoon, unit, other entity, whatever, that doesn't do turnover ops, I mean, is that necessarily normal? Because maybe they're part of a different entity, right? Compared to the British military, it's very important. Okay, so this is very much the norm then, from what I'm understanding from chat. This confirming it is normal. So allegedly, in a situation like this that allegedly happened, where turnover ops aren't followed, I'm assuming, one, there's a chain of command to go through. Two, I'm assuming as well that's just abnormal. That doesn't happen in standard protocol. This is under the assumption of civilian. You have to learn what's normal so you know when it's wrong. Okay, that's fair. You know, I don't have that knowledge or understanding.
On any base in the world, but certainly in a war zone, is there's always someone manning a guard post. And so the first night, it happened to be Corporal Lena's turn to be on watch. Corporal Lena is the second in command of these 8 Marines. And he was up in the guard tower, and you got to put yourself in his mind, okay? Even if you've never been to Afghanistan, just imagine being out in the middle of nowhere, like in the middle of a mountainous desert with no village, no people, no anything.
This is actually MrBallen, the legend. Like, dude has military experience. Dude's an absolute legend.
But at the same time, you are hanging it out there. You are totally exposed. There are people in the mountains around you that want to kill you, for sure. And it's you and 7 other sleeping people right in your little tiny OP. All you got is a radio where you can call back to your main base that's far enough away that if something bad happened, you better hope that 1, you can get through to them, and 2, they can get over here as quickly as they can. And the great fear when you're in these remote locations is that you're going to get ambushed. There's so many stories about these complex attacks being launched on these small little outposts where all of a sudden groups like these 8 Marines just get totally overrun by the Taliban. So
this is actually incredibly fascinating, that because it's a winding path to get to this OP, right? And then, you know, naturally they're having to swap off with it, but it's actually quite impressive that even from such an elevated position as this allegedly is, from an open position, nobody saw or took advantage of them coming in and switching shifts. It's actually fairly impressive. I mean, I'm assuming that they're just, you know, how they went about the exchange was relevant. Maybe they did it at a certain time or in a certain way that made it relevant and doable without risking lives. It's just, I don't know, it's just interesting to me. And then again, I'm going to have military personnel being like, Kip, that's just standard practice. You have to understand, I went to school with some very stupid people. You have to understand, Afghanistan is dark, no city lights. Ah, okay, that could be why. Here it's got some very diverse geography too. Like, that makes a lot more sense then, so they could utilize certain natural lighting and even formations to... Well, because it's on a road. The fact that road wasn't... I almost said bugged. The fact that the road wasn't trapped either is actually quite impressive.
It's a terrifying thing. When I was in Afghanistan, I didn't stand all that much guard duty, but when I did, you're up in the shack and you're kind of looking out into this like vast expanse of kind of nothingness. And you're wondering, like, are people watching me right now?
They probably could be.
Someone taking aim at me right now? I mean, you're protected and you're doing all the things you're supposed to do, but nighttime in Afghanistan, standing guard duty, it's very eerie. And so this first night, Lena is up there, it's very quiet, and his radio that's right next to him, like imagine like a big walkie-talkie, right? Military grade radio. It starts crackling. Military radios, at least American military radios, are from the 1950s, and they have basically not changed.
Has this really not changed? I'm certain we've upgraded radios at certain points. I don't get me wrong. I'm aware of the jokes and the memes, quote unquote jokes and memes of the. I'm aware of the jokes and memes about the lowest bidder and using everything to its fullest extent and, not upgrading anything to the last possible minute unless it directly impacts certain things. That's why we got, 277 Fury as well as the Sig Spear, right? Unless it impacts certain things. I think, has this really not been updated? I mean, I guess to be fair, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it works, it ain't dumb, right? I guess that's also fair. Mountains with minefields, okay, yeah, so there's a lot going on there then. Still impressed that the road wasn't trapped. Mountains are shit for radio. Yeah, I'm assuming it's the geological interference there, just the sheer amount of area to cover as well as natural barriers. Had a phone and a wire, you legend.
They're very durable and they work, but it's not uncommon for them to falter. And
Signars are ancient.
That specialize in just radios that can fix these things for us. Because if you lose your line of communication, you're screwed. And so he's sitting there and he starts hearing crackling on the radio. And so he notices it, but he doesn't think much of it. And the crackling stops and he's looking out into the mountainside and he's kind of looking around and just doing his typical guard duty.
Right.
Then the crackling picks up again and he thinks he can hear someone speaking in the radio. It didn't sound like English. It didn't sound like even words necessarily, but it was a little bit louder. Now he's really paying attention to it. Because he was worried his radio might be going bad, he first took the battery off, looked at it, blew it off, reconnected the battery, rebooted it, and put it back down. And he's a little more keyed into his radio. And then a couple minutes later, he hears this crackling, and now he can clearly hear someone's voice.
I mean, how do you write that off in the military? Like, I'm not saying this to be be either a skeptic or a believer, right? Like, what is the logic and rationale going to debunk that, right? Like, oh, you're just like on lack of sleep, maybe you need to get some rest, maybe it's picking up some interference. Like, what is the rationale there? I'm very curious on that, because this isn't a gotcha. This isn't a gotcha moment. This isn't he heard something on the radio. This is clearly the supernatural. It's really not. I mean, there's going to be, before it even gets to that step, I mean, there's going to be, is somebody else tuned into this channel? Does someone else have this frequency? Are you being spied on? Are your communications are they being what's the word I'm looking for? Compromised, right? Like, I'm assuming cool up to date shits for SOCOM boys. Yeah, I guess that's very out. Like Marines specifically. We haze them and then apologize for the hazing when it turns out to be real. You legend. You check in and report it. Don't try to rationalize it. Look for spy. Okay.
And it sounds like Russian. He thinks someone is speaking in Russian. This is an encrypted radio. You're not picking up random signals all over the place. You only are picking up people that have your crypto. And it doesn't make any sense to pick up somebody else's voice. This has to be someone on your team. And so he thinks, okay, I'll check in with the main base, because my guys are all asleep right here. They're all sleeping right there, 7 of them. There's no beds. They're laying on the ground right there. I can count them. No one's on the radio. So he picks up the radio and he calls into the main base and he says, hey, is anybody pushing traffic out this way to OP Rock? And like right away, they get a response from the main base that says, no, we're not pushing or receiving traffic. Lena's not terrified about this, but he's like, okay, there's something going on with the radio.
Okay, right.
He's crackling.
So this seems like, from everything that I'm hearing, Ravensburg and you in chat, right? This is everything that he should have realistically done. Checked in and just confirmed there was no traffic. So at this point, this would be the proper protocol. He did check in and reported it, and he's trying to rationalize it at this point. And he sees his 7 other squad members there. Likely, quote, lowest bidder piece of shit is my first thought. You legend. Usually beating the headset trying to get it to work. fair. Yarmy Chain Command tends to get the new ship for. I think it does.
And gurgling and weird sounds would persist throughout the night to the point where the next morning, when the next guard came on duty, he said, "Hey, I think there's something strange going on with the radio. You should probably go switch it out and get."
Sarah Mike, that actually brings up the meme. I can't remember who did it. It was the meme of it was either when the Army or the Marines meet the National Guard, and they're like, "Well, how do you secure the building?" And he just closes the double doors and locks it.
Somebody else's radio while you're up here. Lena's relieved of guard duty, and he goes down to check on the other Marines. And at this point, everybody's awake.
So it's pretty secure in terms of encryption.
Of their first full day at OP Rock, and because they have nothing else to do besides defend it, they start taking stock of how well fortified is it. What are some ways that we can improve this place? And they notice that there's a trench dug around the inside of OP Rock.
That'd be abnormal, though, right? To have a trench on the inside? Well, yes and no, right? Because if you have a trench on the outside, yes, that could help deter attackers in the conflict, but it also makes you more noticeable. So a trench on the inside, if they happen to get in, they could fall in the trench on the inside. So maybe that's not as abnormal as I think it is. I don't know. I'm very curious on the thought process behind it.
Right up against the Hescos that allows anyone to stand and not be jutting out of the OP and run the risk of getting shot by a sniper. And they're looking at it and they're thinking to themselves, it's not deep enough. It's maybe a couple feet down. You're certainly not going to be able to stand on this trench. You'll totally be exposed. And they thought, why didn't the British, who were here for 60 days, why didn't they dig a deeper trench? And so Lena and the rest of the Marines decide they're going to spend that day digging the trench a little bit deeper and a little bit wider. As they're digging, Lena hits something metal in the trench. And he pulls it out, and it's like this metal stake, like an engineering stake. And he brushes off the dirt on the stake, and he's looking at it, and he can see some foreign writing, and it looks like Russian writing. And he's
you also want to have some holes to throw grenades in if you get tossed at you. Okay, I could see that. Depends on goals. Trench is like an elongated foxhole. I've heard people getting some weird stuff allegedly in foxholes. I've heard people have been able to set up Xbox 360s in foxholes. I want to know how they do it. I want to... Not that I can necessarily... This is all an allegedly, not that anyone that I've ever come across has ever actually set up an Xbox game cave inside a foxhole. Absolutely not. I'm just curious how they get the power in there. Grenade stop. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So the British probably were digging this then, and then for whatever reason, they ended up stopping it.
He's thinking to himself,
this makes sense.
Weird. Back in the 80s, the Russians were here, and it's totally possible that they may have left some of their gear here, and it got buried. About 10 meters away from Lena is one of the younger Marines named Wilson, who's digging, and at some point he hits the ground, and like a pocket in the soil opens up. And he sees there's some pottery and some pieces of what look like ceramics that are inside of this hole. And after pulling out some of the plates and pots, they pull out a huge human bone, a femur, your leg bone. They ultimately decide to tuck the leg bone back into where it was, and they stop digging in that area, and they continue to dig in the other sections of the trench.
Well, so you are in Afghanistan. It's not even necessarily related to Afghanistan, right? If you're in a section of the world that requires you to dig something, right? Or if it has a history on it, right? The Modern Warfare 2 quote, the rocks, the rocks in here are stained with the blood of thousands of years of conflict, that kind of thing, right? You know, like, I guess in standard operations, would they stop if they discover remains? That's something you wouldn't necessarily report in, right? How was that handled? Because it sounds like that might just be another day in the life, but this is probably deterrent because the British forces said, hey, if you pick up anything, put it back, right? When a wire chica set up transformer to go to the You know what? That's impressive. I don't know how do the drill sergeants, the lieutenants not see the wire? That's my question. But you know what? I'm not going to question it. I'm just going to accept it and call you an absolute legend for doing that. Ignore the grave. Spock's report when security is assured. Right. I actually need to do more research on the Russian conflict mentioned in here, actually. So you do ignore the grave, but you need to... Okay, so ignoring the grave would be standard protocol.
But they couldn't dig more than a couple inches before running into more human remains. And by the end of the day, they had unearthed dozens of skeletons inside of this trench. And so they realized that this is probably what the British meant when they said, if you dig something up, put it back. A couple of weeks go by, and the Marines at this point have accepted that they live in a very creepy place. And on day 13 of being at OP Rock, Hoyt, who had just turned 20 years old, is up on guard duty. As he's sitting there, he starts getting this really uncomfortable feeling that someone is right behind him.
Hilltops are probably hotspots for archaeology because, as my favorite archaeologist said, people love being on top of high shit. Yeah, they do, don't they? Oh my god.
And so at one point, he turns around to look at what's behind him, basically looking back into the camp itself.
Right.
And now, coming from outside the wire where he had just been looking, he hears this horrible, blood-curdling scream. He turns around and he's looking out. He's got his night vision goggles on. He's looking around for anything. And all of a sudden, a couple hundred meters away, he sees a man running between one bush to another bush. Now, they know that at any time they could get attacked. So they're not thinking that this could be anything other than the Taliban coming to attack them. And so the other Marines have jumped up because they heard the scream, and they're looking to Hoyt to be like, what's going on? Hoyt is saying to them, I got a guy, he's about 200 meters away. I just saw him running right to left. Lena runs over to the edge of the HESCO, and he raises his rifle with a thermal imager on it, and he's looking out, and there's no heat signature out there. It's totally cold. There's no animals, there's no people.
You know, I just had a thought that I should probably be careful about, like, watching a bunch of military videos, because I could probably get contacted by the Department of Defense. Hey, Kip, do you want to do some marketing? I just had to have this really weird thought, because I get people reaching out all the time on, hey, do you want to collab with this? You want to do this? We're interested in having you work with a project like this, right? And then I'm just like, I react to a lot of military stuff, and there's an increasing amount of military interest in my content. So I'm kind of just like, should I start wondering if the Department of Defense is just going to be like, hey, if we invite you out here, I know you're a civilian, do you want to do a little bit here? I'm already on a watch list. See, here's the joke, the joke, quote unquote. It's not being on a list at this point, it's how many lists you're on. I can't in good faith encourage that. But god damn it, it's funny.
Certainly there's nothing. And Lena is yelling to Hoyt, where is he? Where do I need to look? And Hoyt's saying, he's right there. I just saw him go behind that bush. But Lena is looking out and he can't see anything on thermal. And he's like, I don't see anything. There's no...
So how do you... Because you don't have a contact at that point, right? I know well, that's just from a movie standpoint, right? Contact, everybody gets, at the ready, right? I mean, assuming it works a little bit different. Here, sign this waiver. I've worked under NDAs before. I can work on OPSEC. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Thermals can't see through windows. Interesting. Is it because they're... What about glass versus glass substitute? Would that change it? Interesting. I'm very curious about that. But no, so how does that get... Because you don't have contact, right? So one person is seeing something through a thermal imaging scope, but another person isn't seeing something through a thermal imaging scope. So how is that handled, right? Because at any moment, right, and security is paramount. I mean, in chat, and I'm sure in the comments section as well when this video goes live, right, you're already, security is paramount here. So glass is opaque to infrared. I did not know that. That's actually super fascinating. Interesting. So I'm assuming at that point you have to have a second person, or at the very least you start waking up the rest of the squad, right? It takes one guy to say contact and everyone to start shooting. Okay, so it's reverse SCA logic. So in SCA, right, and generally other fighting groups I've been in, right, where I can be, mid-rapier match, mid-cut and thrust, mid-heavy armor combat, right? The moment someone calls hold, regardless of who you are, where you're at, you stop whatever you're doing. Okay, so same logic. If someone says contact, everybody's at the ready. Okay.
One out there. The Marines also had a dog that they inherited from the British soldiers that had been there. Her name was Ugly Betty. They loved Ugly Betty.
Legend.
They took care of her, and she was apparently really good at identifying when people were coming towards the OP. So she was a great watchdog. And this whole time, she had been looking in the same direction that Hoyt had seen this figure, and she is barking like a maniac. And even after they're looking with thermal and they can't see anyone out there, they can't get Betty to calm down. She's completely transfixed on the area where Hoyt had seen this figure.
So at this point in time, everyone would probably be at their positions, right? There's a lot of false firefights. Well, I guess to be fair, it's better to be ready and expect the worst than to be caught unawares and have the worst happen, right? F-35s have sapphire lens. That sounds really expensive and super cool.
So for the rest of the night, the Marines are totally on guard, anticipating at any moment that they're going to get attacked. Someone's going to take a shot, they're going to throw a grenade in, because we lost this guy who was right there in front of us. So eventually, the next day, when they didn't get attacked, they just kind of said, okay, and they moved on and just figured it was an anomaly. Another couple of weeks later, on day 26, Zolik, who's another one of the younger Marines, was on guard duty, and it was really hot. He remembers even taking his helmet off because he was sweating so bad.
I have to check chat because you see a lot of movie isms, right? Well, what's one of the most famous ones when people are talking in code, right? Where it's like I can't even think of an example offhand, right? But they're speaking in like super like tight professional military lingo, like, you know, we have the target here, he's Oscar, whatever, right? And they're just speaking, and your people that have actually served in the military will look at that and go, I that's not how we talk, allegedly. No, not the phonetic alphabet. That's, you know, that's if I was to say spell out a name, right? Like Mary, Alpha, Romeo, Ivan, etc. Right? I can never remember the full alphabet. I had to use it when I was in finance because of certain names and certain things, but I have to just double check because seeing someone yelling "contact" to me is a movie-ism, but hearing it actually be a thing is actually super cool because it's like, okay, this is where movie magic and reality kind of meet.
And then at some point, while he's just looking out into the vast open nothingness, he said that the temperature dropped inside of the shack dramatically. So much so that he actually felt cold. There was no breeze, there was no reason for it to be getting cold. And as he's thinking to himself, like, is there a storm coming in or a cold front coming in? He starts feeling like someone's standing behind him. And he keeps looking over his shoulder and no one's there. He's in this tiny little shack. And he's feeling creeped out, and all of a sudden he starts hearing whispering from behind him. Not on the radio, but like in the shack with him. And he keeps turning around and he keeps thinking, like, am I hearing things? Am I losing my mind? And he starts hearing footsteps on the roof of his shack. And that's when he thinks, oh, Smith, who was the kind of class clown of the group, is playing a joke.
That would be, if this is in fact a prank, that's a bold fucking prank to pull, though. Like, that is a bold prank to be on top of something that's already exposed.
He must be whispering outside. I bet he climbed up on top and he's screwing with me. So he jumps out of the shack and looks up, expecting to see Smith standing on the roof of the guard shack. But no one's on the guard shack. At this point, Zolik's pretty spooked. He does a quick search on either side of the guard shack, thinking maybe Smith is there, but no one's there. And then he turns around and, of course, sees that the other 7 Marines are all asleep. So it wasn't Smith, it wasn't any of his teammates. At this point, he goes back in the shack and he raises his rifle and he's looking through his thermal scope. So any human would light up like a Christmas tree if you saw them on a thermal.
Right.
And he's scanning outside all around thinking, did I hear someone who's out there? Because they had that weird run-in 2 weeks earlier with that random person that they could never find. He's thinking maybe there's somebody else out here. And as he's scanning, he sees a man standing a couple hundred meters away with his fists raised like this. Zolik was so caught up.
I mean, at the very least, if you're seeing a contact in any situation, right? I mean, I'm assuming that you're already, I mean, not that you're going to be, like, obviously you have your training, right? You have your training, this is what you're ready for. You're expecting a conflict of some sort. I can see why it kind of hits that weird uncanny valley, right? Like when you see a picture of like a human or a picture of a face, but it's not quite there, or something's just off about it, and you start to feel that uneasiness about it, right? That's, uncanny valley in a nutshell. Obviously, there's a little bit more to that, which, fun fact, uncanny valley is apparently a defense mechanism. So what did we develop it for? This is, of course, allegedly. I heard through the grapevine, just random Googling, that it was a defense mechanism. But in any event, it's like, you see that, right? And it's, you expect someone to maybe hold an AK. You're expecting somebody, they had Dragunovs out there, right? They were old Soviet tech, I think, right? Yeah, you would expect someone with certain implements or doing certain things dressed a certain way. You're not expecting somebody with their fist raised like that. So at least from a civilian standpoint, I could see where somebody could take this and have an uncanny valley moment.
guard from the way he was standing that he actually lowered his rifle to look, because the moon was pretty bright, the illumination was pretty good, and he looked, he couldn't really see him again, so he brought his rifle back up, and now through his thermal the figure was gone. Zolik in interviews has admitted that he was really stressed out about being at OP Rock. He was really down. I think of all the Marines there, he was depressed. He did not want to be there. He felt like he was experiencing real combat fatigue. And he thought at this moment that he's losing his mind, between the whispering and the footsteps on the roof and seeing this person with his fist raised. And so instead of telling people that he had potentially just seen this person out along the perimeter of their OP, he started to convince himself that you're just losing your mind.
Right.
You're stressed and you're hallucinating. You just gotta calm down. For the rest of the night, he would not see the figure on his thermal or anybody out there, but he would hear whispering behind him. He kept hearing footsteps on the roof, but he would go out and no one would be there. So by the time the sun came up, he really thought that he was kind of losing his mind. And so he went to his leadership, Sergeant Green and Corporal Lena, and he told them about what had happened the night before, about, you know, seeing the figure that had disappeared and hearing these whispers and the footsteps. I mean, he really thought that he was losing it, and he requested to be transferred, and they granted it to him.
Right, and that's the thing, is what you could look at that and be like, this could be combat fatigue, this could be lack of sleep. I mean, and there could be, I don't necessarily, I mean, everyone in the Marines, everyone in the military is different, right? There could have been an aversion to having corpses right next to you. I mean, I know civilians that have a lot more weird niche things that unnerve them, right? But I mean, there's a number of reasons. It isn't necessarily related to something paranormal. If anything, if he saw this figure, right, and didn't call contact, would that classify as a security concern? Not calling him bad by any means, right? Not saying that he's not doing his job or anything like that. Just kind of curious. Like, I like definitions and I like defining certain things, which I guess is in part why the military fascinates me in certain circumstances, certain ways, right? Because there's protocols and procedures for a lot of things. When the protocols and procedures aren't necessarily applicable, that's when the fun begins. Lack of rifling. And yeah, the SVDs would be out there. Okay, that makes sense. And yeah, no, I would assume that they're warned to all hell.
And the other 7 Marines were really upset about that. They felt like he was kind of a
on this subject. How does that leave work? I'm sure that there's a certain, because it sounded like they granted his request. So it sounds like you have to put in a request for either transfer or to leave the post, and it either gets rejected or accepted. And if it's accepted, then you can just I'm assuming that there's going to be potential consequences to it. I'm not sure how that works. If you're seeing shit, you need to tell everyone. Okay, so that is a security concern. I am reading that right. Obviously, once again, as a civilian not in this position, I can only say so much. At the very least, saying contact would have been the relevant thing, and maybe that could have led into this decision in this story, right? That could have led to their decision to, hey, you didn't say contact. Clearly, something's getting at you. You can go. Maybe.
Abandoning them. And they were really critical of the reason for him leaving. They're like, oh, you're just playing the crazy card. You're just making that up so you can leave this crappy place that we don't want to be here either. So they were not taking seriously
the in-bullying would be there. I would assume so.
He was using the crazy card to get out of being at OP Rock. Just a couple of days after Zolik's departure, Lena is on guard duty in that guard shack, and as he's looking out, Ugly Betty starts barking really aggressively towards the area that Lena is looking at. And so he raises his night vision goggles and he's scanning the mountainside. I'm
curious if the dog would be an asset or if the dog would be a liability. I mean, regardless, if they want Pupper there and Pupper's there, I mean, take Pupper. I'm just curious if it classifies as a liability because of the barking, or if it would count as an asset as a sort of a pre-contact alarm.
For any sign of people that perhaps Ugly Betty has sensed. And he stops when he sees what he believes is a Taliban scout standing on the mountainside, who's pretty far away, a few hundred meters away, and he switches to his thermal scope to confirm that it's a person before he engages. And when he raises his thermal scope, there's nobody there. There's no heat signature anywhere. But Ugly Betty is still barking like a maniac in the direction of where this potential scout was standing. And so Lena goes back to his night vision goggles like a second later, and he's looking, and he sees the same scout now about 100 meters closer to him, way closer to him. Like, impossible to cover that distance in that amount of time.
So, I mean, he did check night vision. He then swapped to infrared. Infrared didn't pick up anything. Swapping back to night vision, He then sees this thing, this scout, 100 meters closer, right? At that point, it would be a contact situation, right? There is something there, right? Barkin's liability if you're trying to stay low. I could see it being held as a liability. Once again, no pupper hit, anything like that. You know, just I was curious if it does count as a liability or an asset, and got my answer. Thank you, I appreciate that. So yeah, that would be at that point. He would be alerting everyone else, I would assume.
He practically falls over when he sees it. He switches to his thermal and he's getting ready to engage, but there's nothing there. And this is all happening in a matter of seconds.
Right.
He goes back to his NVGs and he's looking and there's nothing there. And as he's about to go to his thermal for one last look, he feels a tap on his shoulder, which he believes is going to be one of the other Marines that must have heard him frantically moving around in the guard shack. And when he turns...
So the issue with that, Quetzal, and I was doing that math in my head, right? 100 meters, 300 feet roughly crossed in less than 3 seconds. So you could also theoretically rationalize it as there is the scout up top, right? But, you know, unless you're for sure certain it is the same scout, because they could be... they could be using a similar dress style. They could be using a similar clothing appearance, right? You have your... scout up on the ridge, like he was saying, and then as soon as that, the person allegedly up there found cover, you could have your person that's 100. So there's two people. That being said, I mean, that is me trying to reach for conclusions. I'm not sure of how tight that timing would be and what communications that would be, if you would pick up any comm traffic in between. Probably some sheep odor smashing. yeah, and it could be that too. It could be also unrelated. It could be that it was a farmer or something up on the ridge, and closer was in fact an advanced scout. There's so many factors to consider in a situation like this. You assume the most threat. That is true. I guess that is fair. Thank you, Raven.
Because there's no one there. There's no one anywhere near the shack. All 7 are asleep in the middle of the camp. At this point, Lena felt bad because he was critical of Zolik, who had left because he had heard voices and seen apparitions out in the distance. And here's Lena, the second in command of the group, having the exact same experience. But over the next 10 days, Hoyt, Smith, and Wilson would all have very similar experiences in that guard shack. And after a while, they all began sharing their stories, and they all realized that Zolik probably wasn't lying, and we were unfair to be critical of him because we've all experienced this now. Then on day 59, the day before they're scheduled to leave, all of their radios go dead. All of them. And Lena goes over to Gibbs, who was their comms guy, and he's like, what's going on? And Gibbs was like, I've been working on the radios this whole time we're here. I've changed nothing. They've always worked. Now, they did have a satellite phone, but it was an unreliable way to get in touch with reinforcements if you really needed it. They're pretty much isolated at this point, and they're all just sitting there, just hoping they can get through one more night without any problems. Wilson is the one actually in the guard shack, and then all of a sudden, machine gun fire opens up right outside of their base. And Wilson is totally caught off guard. He has no idea where it's coming from. He's trying to call it out to the guys where they're getting shot from, and all the other Marines are scrambling to the walls. They're taking cover behind the Hescos.
Yeah, because I mean, what do you do at that situation, especially if you don't have a direction on fire? I'm assuming you're to find what cover you can and await further orders or await further clarification on where it's coming from. You can't. I mean, just from a basic, if you don't know where an attack is coming from, you don't know where something's coming from, how do you necessarily fight the thing? Obviously, I'll leave it up to the Marines. The Marines can answer that really easy, right? In the initial moments, absolutely, you need to assess where it's coming from, I would assume.
And as they're laying there, Lena runs up into the guard shack with Wilson. He's like, grabs him and he's like, where are they shooting us from? And Wilson's like, I have no idea. And it's like, it's so loud. There's all this gunfire coming in at them. And as Lena and Wilson are trying to figure out where this is coming from, they hear the distinctive sound of an RPG being fired at them. It's a rocket-propelled grenade. It's like a whistling sound, and they know it's going to hit them at any moment.
I think that's something that modern games haven't really captured. I mean, it's like Call of Duty, Battlefield, Resident Evil, right? We all have RPGs in these games. I've never really heard the thunk makes sense, right? I've never really heard the whistle on it, which is interesting.
2 of them brace for impact, and they hear the sound of this RPG smashing inside of the OP, and the machine gun fire is just continuing. It's a non-stop. And so a couple of the other younger Marines basically low-crawled their way into the trench where they were protected from these rounds, and they're thinking, like, we got to make sure no one's in the trenches. And so they start clearing the trenches, but no one's in the trench. And it's just this constant barrage of gunfire. They have no idea where it's coming from. And then just as suddenly as it started, the gunfire stops and it's silent. As soon as the shooting stopped, the Marines did not just poke their head up and say everything's fine now. If you're being shot at, you assume that even if there's a break in the gunfire, they're going to start shooting at you again.
Right.
And so for hours...
Yeah, just because it's done doesn't, you know, they could just be stopping prematurely. You know, they're waiting for you to poke your head out. Absolutely, I could see that.
Just like waiting for the next round of fire to start, but they don't even know where it's coming from. And they're kind of isolated and exposed. So they're all just kind of like hunkered down against the Hescos waiting to respond to the next volley of fire. But it never comes. And when the sun comes up, they're able to take stock of the damage to their OP from all the machine gun fire and from the rocket-propelled grenade. But there's no damage. No one had ever been shooting at the OP. There was no damage. So they had no explanation for it. So when reinforcements...
I mean, yeah, you would see some sort of bullet holes. Yeah, not necessarily casings, right, depending on the distance they were away. But you would see some sort of damage change to the surroundings.
Arrived, they just wanted to pack their stuff up and get the heck out of there, and they did. After leaving OP Rock, very shortly after, Smith, Parker, and Diggs, 3 of the 8 Marines that were there, were all killed in Afghanistan in separate instances. And then Sergeant Green, who was their leader, was very badly injured in an IED blast.
I think part of that, so in stories like this, generally it's related to an inciting incident, right? Where somebody, and just extending outside of the military aspect, right? Someone picked up a box they didn't mean to. They opened a box they weren't supposed to. They invited something they weren't supposed to do. They disturbed a grave. Any variant of these, right? And thus, you know, you'll see people, you know, die under mysterious circumstances, or something happens to them, some tragedy befalls them, right? It's a common trope I see in a lot of copypastas. So it's hard to really say if that's the case here, because especially in a conflict like Afghanistan, right? I mean, it's a conflict. There is the potential for loss of life.
Lena believes that when they were digging out those trenches and finding all those bones, that they unleashed something. It turned out a lot of people had lost their lives on that little strip of rock. When the Russians invaded Afghanistan, they captured OP Rock and killed all of the Mujahideen that were located at OP Rock. Then the Taliban came in and they took back OP Rock from the Russians and killed all the Russians that were at OP Rock. Then Americans came in and took back OP Rock from the Taliban, killing all the Taliban that were there. So you have all these people, probably dozens and dozens of people that at one point have been holding OP Rock, that had all been killed at OP Rock. And so Lena believes that it's only a matter of time before this curse that they unleashed comes back to get him. So I'd love...
Yeah, it's one of those... This is a very, very common trope in stories like this. And I'm not necessarily dismissing the stories. In, you know, modern ghost culture, you know, things like phasmophobia, ghost adventures, right? Things like that, right? It's, you know, people that either hold on to regrets or intense determination, generally expiring in tragic ways, tend to leave this residual energy, and, you know, they can inhabit and or haunt these locations, is generally what the trope is. You took a battle damage assessment after the battle to take stock of the situation. The fact that there's no craters and bullet holes is alarming. Yeah, how do you handle that? Because paperwork is going to have to get done in some capacity, right? They could have been purely trying to stress them out. Short paragraph I used doing if you are interested. Interesting. So there could be situations where it's intentional, where it's not friendly fire, right? But it's... Okay, I could see that actually, though. Like, that's a valid, grounded way to kind of address this.
To get your reaction, what do you think happened at OP Rock? Is this paranormal, or is there a rational explanation for this? Let me know in the comments, and I'll do my best to get back to as many of you as I possibly can. If you enjoyed this story and you haven't done this already, please play Ding Dong Ditch on the like button's house, and then also subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly 3, 4, even 5 video uploads. If you have a story suggestion, we have a subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. You can submit your stories there. And if I intentionally use your story, I will certainly credit you. If you want to get in touch with me, you can
I like that he does credit people. It's super cool.
Message me on Instagram. My handle is JohnBallen416. I'm also very active on TikTok, where my handle is MrBallen. So whether I see you on Reddit, Instagram, TikTok, or here on YouTube, or some combination, I'm just very thankful for your support. And until next time, guys, see ya.
No, it was a cool video. And OP Rock needs to be doused in the And quotes the form of bleach, moonshine, and pickle juice. It just sounds like it just sounds like this isn't what's the word I'm looking for? It's not reciprocating. It's not good for life, much less the undeath. It's a probing method. They're hanging out across the mountain, shooting to harass and hope they move or fuck up. Okay, so right, that's a grounded, real-world explanation for that, thus leaving the issue of the RPG. If the RPG was in fact fired, and it would leave a black crater as Chat's decide, where would that have gone? That's kind of the one thing that really isn't dismissed, at least as of yet. Back we had Spec Ops simulate vampire attacks and some. Did we really? Oh my god! If there's a video that exists on that, I need to react to that. That's wild. Soldier and Kind of Monster, it's a good one. Don't worry, we have the Kandahar Giant is not unknown to me. Nothing survives. Yeah, I guess that's fair. But alas, what are your thoughts on this? As always, MrBallen's an excellent creator. I absolutely love him. Just excellent style of storytelling and just super legit dude. Everything I've come across on that dude. And just absolute pleasure to watch, absolute pleasure to react to. And if you didn't know about MrBallen before, and especially because it is spooky month, I would highly recommend that you go and check him out. Absolutely recommend you go check him out if not. But, what are your thoughts on this? With military experience, do you think that a lot of this, made sense? Do you think that there were some mess ups in the operational playbook? Do you think that protocol went, kind of out the window at a certain point? Do you think that this is this could have been a, what's the word I'm looking for? I apologize. I just saw it up top, where they were trying to stress out and or make the Marines at OP Rocket. They're trying to make them, mess up. Do you think that this could have a rational explanation? Do you think that this is a paranormal explanation? And do you have any sort of experiences yourself? As always, please, as I have worked under NDAs, I do understand the importance of not disclosing information, NDAs and OPSEC, please. And also not anonymizing, oh my god, that word, information where needed. Please review all that and take that into consideration in comments. And please make sure that you're being respectful. And I will see you in the next one.